Hello everyone, I'm Sahid. Thank you for clicking this video. I'm very happy that you're here. So today I will be continuing my chapter series on Blessings by Chukwuebuka Ibeh. Today I'll be reading part 2, chapter 4. So before I get into today's chapter video, I want to give, a brief recap slash summary or introduction about what I've read so far about this African literature that I've been reading. Blessings by Chukwuebuka so far has been really moving for me, and even before reading a book, I knew that I would enjoy the sort of story because it's a book about Nigerian life, African stories. It's about queer stories. It's about family dynamics. It's about the exploration of one's identity and sort of sexuality, and all the complex themes about just figuring out oneself. It's really, actually, because it takes place in a teenage boy's life, who is the main character, um, and it's just been really interesting reading about how we're slowly getting to know the different characters, and how just with part one, chapter one, chapter two, and chapter three, these different themes have showed up in different ways. And as I continue to read, I'm paying attention to them, and I've been gaining a sense of connection to all these themes, because these are themes that relate truly to my identity. I'm also Nigerian, queer. I've dealt with family dynamics. I still do deal with that, and it's something I think about very often in my life. I'm constantly thinking about my identity, and so reading stories that really sort of tell my complexity in a way that makes me be able to better understand it and express it, just makes my life a bit easier, knowing that I'm not alone, and just being able to have stories that connect to me makes me feel good. And so it's been really meaningful for me reading this book. But with chapter one of part one, we are introduced to a boy named a boy. I know. Whenever I say that, it really is so funny to me. But yeah, so a boy is the son to Okezi, and Okezi is an old friend of Anozi, who is the father of Obifuna, and Okezi unfortunately passed away, and since his passing, his family has been going through a lot, and so one of his family members, you know, was hoping and of trying to find opportunities for a boy, and so when Anansi came to visit them, he sort of begs Anansi to, please take this boy and help him sort of find opportunities within the same sort of working space that Anansi does. So he sort of takes a boy into their home. A boy recently graduated secondary school, and he's trying to, learn more within the trade industry, and that's the industry that Anansi happens to work. And so, he brings a boy to the house, and family members, particularly Anansi's wife Uzoamaka, didn't feel, sort of good about the whole situation at first, because she felt as though Anansi brought a stranger into her home, without really informing her that he was going to bring him. Then, Anansi, as the husband, sort of has to find a way to explain the whole situation to her. So he does that, and at some point she later accepts that. But we come to see later in the other chapters that she still isn't sure how to feel about a boy. But other people in the family like Obifuna and Ekene are sort of amused by him. We see that in the first chapter. Obifuna is sort of amused by his dark skin, his tall height. He's literally about a few inches taller than his actual father. So he's like, it's quite surprising because his father is also quite tall. So he sort of lingers his eyes on him. That's, in chapter one and stuff. And that's, in my chapter one video, I mentioned how that made me think about, or sort of wonder how their relationship was going to build up in the other chapters. But we do come to see that in chapter three, which I will talk about shortly. But yeah, in chapter one, we are introduced to a boy, Anozi Uzamaka Ekene. Ekene, by the way, is Anozi's younger brother. Ekene is 13 months younger than Anozi. And so we get to sort of be introduced to the family in chapter one, and also introduced slightly to sort of Obifuna's identity and sort of complexity in his life. So, in particular, I want to talk about, the sense of Obifuna feeling like he needs his younger brother's approval, in certain aspects of his life. Obviously, his younger brother is slightly different from him, and we come to read more about how his younger brother is slightly different from him. But we have a scene in which they both go to football practice, and while they were trying to pick teams with other friends who they normally play soccer with, or excuse me, football with, they struggled to decide teams. And at some point, a person mentioned how Obifuna would be a great fit, but they all sort of laughed at the idea of having Obifuna on their team, and that sort of made Obifuna feel ostracized and excluded. And so what he later ended up doing is sitting in the grass and basically watching them and holding water bottles for them while they played soccer. And even his own brother couldn't even have him on his team because he just had certain perspectives and views about his own brother. And that was really, really sad reading about. But that was one thing, you know, I felt slightly emotional about in chapter one. And then in chapter two, we're introduced to the, sort of the birth of Obifuna and sort of the struggles that his mother, Uzuamaka, went through while she was pregnant. So, among the many struggles of a pregnant woman, one thing that Uzuamaka dealt with the most was just uncertainty. First of all, uncertainty of how this pregnancy was gonna go, because prior to this pregnancy, she had miscarriages, and she just wasn't sure how this one was gonna go. And then she also had a lot of uncertainty with choosing a name for the child. She had suggestions from family members and stuff, but she just didn't like the names they were given, and so she really struggled to choose a name. Now onto she chose Obifuna, which means may my heart not be lost. That's what it translates to in English, and it's an Igbo name that she felt was right, and it really was right, because of all the uncertainty that she dealt with, and her naming her son that felt right. And then we also sort of are introduced to Ekene, sort of her pregnancy journey with Ekene, which was quite difficult. She almost lost her life being pregnant with Ekene, and she struggled to have a sense of feeling how she did with Obifuna, who she felt was a special baby. But after all those miscarriages, she finally gives birth to this dimpled smile boy who had long hair, who people just loved, and he was very playful with everyone. She struggled to feel that way with Ekene, who just was the quite opposite of Obifuna, and there was just a lot of things that were different with Ekene. We read about how just he was this really bad child. He said bad things to teachers. He got into fights, and it was just really unfortunate seeing that or reading about that. Just reading how different they are. So these differences were something that we were introduced to, and it was highlighted on by the author in chapter 2. And we're also sort of introduced to family dynamics within Obifuna's household. Obifuna loves dancing, and his mom, doesn't have a problem with that. Um, but she feels slight ways about it, particularly because of how her husband, Anazi, feels about it. He completely hates the fact that Obifuna, goes to parties and dance and stuff like that. And so, this one party his old friend had, and Obifuna, when they got back home, he was slapped by his father, and he sort of says like, are you a woman in a man's skin? Why are you, dancing and doing all these things? Because obviously in many African households, the idea of a man dancing is not seen as right. People, there's this belief that it's women only that should be dancing, and so this sort of traditional perspectives of things makes it hard for Obifuna to be able to do something he loves, and so he later grows to become this reserved, quiet boy who just changed due to not only things like that happen in the household, but what things that happen in school when he started to be more true with his identity, how he realized how society were against it. He didn't, know what it truly meant, but he got into fights. He was often bullied. He sometimes would come back home with marks on his body, and just all these things really makes it hard for a young boy who's just growing up and trying to be himself. Later we are also in chapter 3. We are sort of introduced more into a boy and Obifuna's sort of relationship. And we're also introduced to how a boy has just played a crucial role in Obifuna family's household. He's been great with helping Anozi at the shop, with their trade industry and stuff like that. And Anozi just loves praising and talking about him to Uzamaka, and talking about how just trustworthy he is, how he's been really helpful, and how just customers love him. And so he often talks about that. And then we also are introduced to how he's just been really great in the house. He would helping with chores and going on errands, and just helping the family. And we read in that chapter that a boy coming to live with him just felt right, like there was just an empty spot waiting for him, and he just came at the perfect time. It seemed like, and so reading about it was interesting, and I really was moved by also how just a boy has sort of adapted to this new environment, coming from the village, and just being in this new environment in Port Harcourt, and doing all these great things, improving his English, helping out, and just how just with all the things he's been doing, how even Anna, as he sees that he's going to be such a great business owner one day. But to get back to sort of Anna's, Obifuna and a boy's relationship, we see how things slightly start to get more intimate. First of all, it started with getting introduced to. Obviously, we knew that slightly that Obifuna kind of has like these like thoughts about a boy and all these different, interesting thoughts. But we really come to see it in chapter 3. First of all, with how a boy sometimes sleeps on the same bed as Ekene um, and Obifuna, and this one time was a scene in which we are introduced to how when they were sleeping, Obifuna starts to sort of feel a boy coming slightly closer to him, and this it was just crazy reading about that. He was getting close to his thighs, and a boy, Obifuna starts to get these like intrusive thoughts, and he starts to have his fingers sort of rubbing on his face and touching him because he knows he's asleep and he wouldn't know. But then he sort of notices a smile, so that sort of leaves this like awkward moment the next day when they wake up. And he noticed sort of a boy slightly trying to not make eye contact with him and avoiding that. Um, and just how later that also the next day, how in the kitchen a boy was like pondering while he was washing dishes. Well, obviously a boy, Obifuna was pondering in the kitchen, obviously about a boy, and a boy sort of notices and sees him pondering, and he sort of comes in, and then Obifuna notices him, and he's like, "You've been holding that plate for like 1 hour or something," and then um, it was a funny moment, and then what is it called? Later during that same moment, Obifuna sort of just gets the urge to ask the question he's been wanting to ask, which is that does he have a girlfriend? And he sort of like laughs at the question, and then a boy is like, "Are you jealous?" or something like that. And then this leads to like this intimate moment, just like staring at each other, and then it gets really intimate, and then at some point they get caught by Obifuna's father, and due to this, he looks at Obifuna in a weird way, and he at some point gets a cord, looks around for a cord to most likely beat Obifuna for what he saw was happening. Who knows how long he was there watching it as we were having a little moment. But yeah, that's sort of how part one, chapter one, chapter two, chapter three, was, and hopefully that wasn't too much of a long intro. I just like to yap, guys. No, honestly, I just love, thinking about what I've read and getting to share it with you guys. And I hope you guys also sort of, have these different thoughts as well. I know each reader often, have different perspectives, and it's also interesting hearing what different readers think. So if you guys have like similar perspectives, kindly comment and express whatever perspectives that you had while you read part one, from chapter one to chapter three. But yeah, today I'll be reading part two, chapter four, and it's kind of long, so I hope you will tune in for the entire reading of chapter four. Part 2, Chapter 4. Owerri, 2007. The walls surrounding the building were tall and unpainted, with sharp broken bottles jutting out unevenly atop them. On a sign next to the red gate were the words Rehoboth Seminary in an unmissable red print. "We're here," Ngozi said, turning to Obifuna and speaking for the first time since they had left Port Harcourt. Obifuna remained quiet, staring through the window at the defaced walls of the school as Ngozi filed into the line of cars making their way through the open gates and parked under a slender coconut tree in the compound. Ngozi got out of the car first and turned round to get Obifuna's box from the boot. Obifuna let himself out after him but remained standing by the door. A man walked up to them and shook his father's hand with both of his, slightly bowing. Obifuna vaguely remembered him as the man who had spoken at length with his father a month ago when they were here for the entrance exams. Now, as they talked, Obifuna looked at the procession of curiously young boys clutching school bags and rolling boxes up to where they would be searched. On the outer gate, in front of what looked like a chapel, solemn-faced men stood behind long tables, leafing through the boxes mounted on them. Obifuna, Anazi called. Obifuna turned to face him. This is Mr. Josiah. He works here. He will be your guardian. Obifuna stared at Mr. Josiah. If he stood on his toes, he would match Mr. Josiah's height. The man's smile was too wide, too watery, and Obifuna worried spittle would drool from the corners of his mouth. I've given Mr. Josiah some money for your upkeep, Anansi continued. Meet him if you need anything or if you need to call me. His tone made it clear he did not expect Obifuna to follow through on the latter. Obifuna nodded. His father turned to Mr. Josiah, who seemed in a daze. Oh, come with me, Mr. Josiah said, snapping back into consciousness. He led the way to the search area and helped Obifuna to hoist his box on the table in front of a stern-looking man. He mumbled an inaudible reply to Obifuna's greetings and yanked at the zip of the box. Bring out your prospectus, he said. Obifuna dug into his pocket and retrieved the slim booklet listing his required possessions. At intervals, the man read from the prospectus and rummaged in the box for the item. There was an almost deliberate, disorderly vigor to the way he overturned the neat folds of clothes Obifuna's mother had taken care to put together the night before. The man pushed the provisions aside as if they offended him somehow, nearly overturning the ceramic cup in the box. He held it up and flashed Obifuna a look. We don't use this here. Your cup must be plastic or aluminium. Your father will go home with it. He rummaged further and stopped. Where is your white bed sheet? Sir, are you deaf? The man yanked at his own ears. Your white bed sheet for Sundays. I don't have, sir, Obifuna said. His father had been meticulous in going through the prospectus, even taking off the purchases he made each day. It surprised Obifuna to realize he had missed this. What did the prospectus say? The man asked. Obifuna kept his eyes on the table, embarrassed at the high pitch of the man's voice, which was already drawing attention to them. Well, I can't let you pass if... The man stopped. Is that a brown belt you have on your waist? Obifuna glanced down at his own waist, as if seeing it for the first time. This one, he had to admit, was an intentional transgression. His mother had mentioned it at home, but they had been in too much of a hurry, and his father had shrugged it off as irrelevant. "Take it off," the man said. "Only black is allowed." Obifuna was fumbling with the belt when he felt hands on his shoulders. Mr. Josiah said, the watery smile not leaving his face, "Sir Ofo, I beg easy on my boy." Sir Ofo did not return the smile. "His things are not complete. The father has given me some money to buy a white bedsheet and black belt. They did not know. It was in the prospectus," Sir Offer countered with a half snort, waving Obifuna away. Obifuna zipped the bag and hoisted it onto his head. He walked over to his father. "You'll be all right here," Ngozi said. "Read your books, go to church, and keep your head down." He paused. He seemed to hover, undecided on the next line of action. Finally, he reached out to place a hand on Obifuna's shoulder. "One day, when you are older, you will understand why this was necessary." With that, he walked briskly to his car. Obifuna watched him drive off, a cloud of red dust billowing after him. "This way," Mr. Josiah said, steering him towards the second gate, which led to the main campus. The buildings stood about in a jumbled arrangement, as if there had not been a plan, and most had been erected as an afterthought. "You will be placed in Obunike House," Mr. Josiah said as they walked. "It's the house for SS1 boys. You have the added advantage of being closest to the classroom complex, and it's kind of secluded, so you'll be out of sight of the more senior students." They walked further, Obifuna uncomfortably aware of the eyes planted on him from the windows of the buildings they passed, until they came upon a faded brick building in the distance. It was partly hidden from view by tall grasses growing in front of him. In front of it. "Most of it will come down soon," Mr. Josiah said, as if reading his mind. From a low-hanging concrete slab, a group of boys playing table tennis stopped to stare at him. Mr. Josiah led the way up the stairs and down the corridor, stopping in front of the fourth door. "This is your room," he announced, walking inside. "And this is your bunk." He indicated a vacant top bunk close to the window. The lower bunk had two boys sitting on it, their game of cards suspended, regarding him with open curiosity. "Who owns this bunk?" Mr. Josiah asked, tapping the lower bunk. One of the boys lifted his hand. "Good. This is your room. This is your new bunkmate. Help him get settled in," he said in a tone that was not a request. Obifuna watched him leave. "So, are you a rainmaker?" the boy asked once Mr. Josiah was out of the door. "A what?" "You know, do you, wet the bed at night?" "Oh." Obifuna took a breath. "No." "Good." The boy beamed, relieved. "Because the last thing I want is your piece in my mouth in the middle of the night," he said. "They call me Wisdom," the boy added, extending a hand. Obifuna took it. "Obifuna." You need help with that? Wisdom asked, glancing at his box. No, it's okay, Obifuna said. But Wisdom helped him unpack anyway, making a space in the makeshift wardrobe for him and clearing out the upper compartment of his own locker to temporarily accommodate Obifuna's provisions. He disappeared from the room and returned a few minutes later with a bare mattress. In the middle was a stain the shape of a hastily drawn map, and it had a faint odor of stale urine. Obifuna gaped at him. I can't use this. Why not? Wisdom patted the phone. It's dry. I don't even know who the previous owner was. Wisdom paused. He looked at Obifuna with amusement in his eyes. See this Ajebo? You think you're still at home? He said. Look, it's a choice between this and sleeping on the floor. You should consider yourself lucky. Not everyone gets a bed to sleep in on their first day. When do I get mine? Wisdom shrugged. Who knows? Could be tomorrow, could be next week. You might never get it until you graduate. Obifuna sighed. Included in the prospectus had been the instructions to deposit money for a mattress, cupboard, and bucket. He still had the receipt his father had given to him nestled in his breast pocket to present to the bursar whenever the products were available. He watched as Wisdom installed the mattress on the bunk above, wrapped in Wisdom's spare bed cover. He climbed down after he was done and gave the bed one satisfied tap. This should do. Obifuna nodded, touched. Thank you. No worries. That night, Obifuna dreamed of walking all the way home to the sight of his mother and a boy on the staircase, waiting for him. Wisdom woke him the following morning by tapping his back repeatedly. Obifuna sat up in bed and peered down at Wisdom, squinting in the harsh glare of the lamp on his face, unable to place for an instant where he was. In the distance, he could make out the fading echo of a bell and feet shuffling out of the room, down the corridor. That's the rising bell, Wisdom explained, putting out the lamp. Let's go for prayers. Quickly, before the seniors come. Obifuna descended from the bunk and felt his way around with his feet in the dark. What are you looking for? Wisdom asked. My slippers. Did you leave them on the floor last night before going to bed? Yes, right here. Obifuna tapped his feet on the ground next to Wisdom's cupboard. Ah, no, you don't do that, Wisdom said. The owners have collected them. What owners? They're mine. My father got them for me at home before we came here. Wisdom gave a short laugh. What I mean is, you know what? Never mind. He reached into his locker and produced a pair of oversized sandals. Manage with these ones. Manage with these for now. Let's go. As they walked out of the door, Obifuna asked Wisdom if he would ever see his slippers again. No, Wisdom said, simply. Prayers were short, led by the chapel prefect, an equally short SS3 student who stomped his feet at intervals, holding on to the waistline of his trousers, as if worried they would slip off otherwise. Afterwards, Obifuna stood in a queue at the tap with the plastic bucket Wisdom had provided for him. The bathroom was swarming with students, so he opted to join some boys who had their baths on the small field in front of their house. Wisdom laughing at how he had become an outlaw on his very first day. By the end of the day, he was well settled into his class, already briefed by Wisdom on the routines. At prep, he flipped through his mathematics textbooks, trying to focus on the exercises and understand the formulae, but his mind couldn't hold them long enough to extract any meaning. He was further distracted by the low but insistent drumming of the boy behind him. He fought for a growing urge to turn round and tell him off. "It's not making sense, eh?" said the boy next to him. Obifuna looked at him. Earlier he had observed him with an indistinct interest, noting the way the boy studied him up close from time to time, trying to get Obifuna's attention. Obifuna shook his head, giving in, finally. "Nothing. Don't stress it. We have all term," he said. "Let's talk." Obifuna turned to give the boy his full attention. He had a curiously shaped head, an odd contrast with his smooth, handsome face. His smile was awkward, undecided, as if he had yet to make up his mind about Obifuna. "About anything," the boy said. "Where did you move from?" "Port Harcourt," Obifuna said. "What was your old school like?" "Very good," Obifuna said. He wondered if he sounded shallow. He had loved that school, had thrived there, even amid a fair competition. He remembered the kind, soft-spoken teachers, the friends he had slowly acquired. The result of his junior YEC exams had been released a month ago, and the ed mistress had phoned his parents personally to give her congratulations. "So why did you transfer here?" the boy asked. Obifuna looked back at the book spread open in front of him. He panicked for an instant, wondering if the boy had seen the look in his eyes, if the strange student had been able to see past the facade and read him somehow. The scars on his back were yet to fully heal, occasionally becoming tender when he had a bath. How could he describe the sting of the cord that Saturday morning as it struck skin? And yet, even in that moment, he had been primarily conscious not of the pain from the thrashing, but of the fear in his father's eyes. He still remembered his mother's alarm when she returned from the salon to see the marks, how she had spent the whole evening screaming at his father, her voice bouncing off the walls of the house late in the night as Obifuna tried to sleep. His back taut with pain. Afterwards, she asked him what had happened, and he lied that he had broken a plate, grateful that Ekene had already disposed of the day's rubbish. She looked at him with doubt in her eyes, but she did not probe. He remembered, too, the look on her face when his father broke the news that he would be sitting the entrance exam at the seminary in a few days' time. His mother protested, pointing out his outstanding performance at his current school. But Obifuna looked across the table to find his father's eyes on him, the coldness of his gaze prompting him to say, "I want to go, Mommy." And she had turned to him in surprise, aware that something beyond her grasp had just passed between father and son, something that categorically excluded her. Again, that look of doubt had returned to her eyes. Again, she said nothing. A sudden silence descended on the class. A senior student had walked in, and he stood now by the door, regarding the class with one sweep of the head, his face set in a frown. As he made to leave, someone hissed. The senior student turned back to the class. "Who did that?" This time the silence lasted even longer. Obifuna waited for someone to speak, for the boy to confess, but nothing happened. "Everybody kneel down," the senior student said. Obifuna wondered as the whole class dropped to their knees, where the whip the senior now held in his hands had come from. He glanced sideways at the boy next to him, who had made the sound. The boy looked straight ahead with such a perfectly blank expression on his face that Obifuna wondered if he had been mistaken. The senior student walked up and down the row, issuing measured threats if the culprit was not named. Obifuna's knees hurt from the tight position in which he was wedged behind his desk. "You, stand up," the senior student said suddenly, pointing to Obifuna. Obifuna hesitated before he rose. His chest hurt from the furious beating of his heart. "Tell me who made the sound," the senior said. Obifuna cleared his throat and swallowed. Next to him, he could feel the boy tense. He could feel also all eyes in the room fixed squarely on him, waiting. He began to perspire. "Since you're not going to talk, come out. You serve as an example to the others." Obifuna let himself out from behind his desk and walked all the way to the front. "Hold that wall," the senior said, tapping the cane on the desk. Obifuna turned to the wall, steadying himself for the whip. He was startled when someone shouted, "Senior, he's a new student." The senior student paused, looked at him curiously. "Are you a new student?" Obifuna nodded. The senior gave him a gentle tap with the cane, as if in regret at the fun he had just missed. "And you're already allowing them to spoil you." He sized him up with a smile. "Go back to your seat." Obifuna felt light on the way back to his seat, as if he might float should he lift his feet any higher. A soft murmur followed the senior's exit. The boy next to him nudged him, staring at him in open wonder. "You're a real one," he said. Obifuna nodded. He was quite stupid, all right. He wondered if the boy had really been ready to see someone else suffer punishment for his own offense. Obifuna wondered, too, if the boy was the one who had shouted the information that rescued him. "My name is Jeku," he said. It was Jeku who showed him the ropes, providing him with the hacks necessary for survival. Best to wake up and have your bat before the rising bell went off. and the bathroom became too crowded. Best to store water in the mornings after breakfast, when the tap was free, so you had some in reserve for afternoon or evening baths. Whatever you did, never miss chapel or forget to dress your bed with white sheets on Sundays. Obifuna learned to soak little quantities of raw gari in water before night prep, so that he arrived after prep to meet a bloated, bland tasting but wholly satisfying ration. He learned to cut his soap into smaller pieces to make it last longer and to dissuade people from asking to share with him in the bathroom. He learned to fold dry clothes underneath his pillows before bedtime so that they had straight lines on them by morning. He learned to stay out of the way of seniors, never look them in the eye, cross the other path when they were sighted, never even smile. He learned to make the most of his time there. Still, boarding school tired him. He hated the sharp sound of the rising bell, swift and resounding, which made the inside of his ear throb, jolting him even when he was awake. He hated the eternal sense of urgency that pervaded the air. He hated having to hurry to devotions held at the school court, to class, to the refectory, to bed. He hated the excruciatingly long prayer sessions at rising and at the end of prep. He hated the veiled suspicion with which everyone regarded each other, seeking to outwit and at the same time avoid being outwitted. He hated having to take his bath in the bathroom, an open yard next to the perpetually messy toilet, where feces lined up on the ground and flies gathered in the hot afternoons, so that his first instinct always was to throw up. Jeku laughed the first time he complained and reassured him that he would get used to it, and even the thought of getting used to it dampened him. He hated the senior students, towering, malevolent figures who seemed to get off on sadistic behavior. Corporal punishments for even the most minute offense came in vicious, sickly creative forms. The stories terrified Obifuna. The group whipping by seniors, the peculiar ex-perfect mercifully expelled, who took pleasure in burning the fingerprints of those who defied him with a lighter. Gluttonous senior students who seized the meals of juniors and made them watch as they ate. A classmate showed Obifuna a triangular-shaped scar on his arm. A senior student had flung an iron at him, newly emptied of burning coal. It was unthinkable to report any of this. Snitches were despised, surprisingly even among the victims. Obifuna understood before long. The boys endured what they endured because theirs was a system that promised reciprocity. The time would come when they, too, would be seniors, at the helm of affairs, free to let off the frustrations accumulated over their years as juniors. The promise of this future gratification made the present suffering bearable, even desirable, for suffering would toughen them and make them more brutal, more skilled in knowing how to break a body. The analogy sickened Obifuna to his stomach. He observed the junior students below him, innocent and unassuming, blithely unaware what they had, simply by being young, signed themselves up for an unimaginable horror. He felt worse at the thought that they would be broken into a state of compliance and inherit the idea of reciprocity themselves, and that they would pass it down to the ones who came after them. And he hated the small but firm certitude in his gut that it was only a matter of time before he lost his calm reason and became the very thing he despised. He hated the food. The tea at breakfast was a whitish, insipid liquid that the boys supplemented with their own beverages. Lunch was the predictable gari and a variety of soups similar in their watery tastelessness. The egusi soup with unground seeds sticking out, the ogbono with excess palm oil floating on top. Only Sundays were different. Obifuna came to appreciate the egg sauce served with bread and a better tasting tea at breakfast. But it was the lunch he most looked forward to all week. White rice and stew, made occasionally with meat. He was irritated, however, by the long queues at mealtime, the boys pushing and shoving each other until they threatened to overturn the cooler holding the food on the table. Most of his classmates repulsed him. Brash, semi-young men, too old to still be in secondary school, sporting a crude and vulgar sense of humor. He was astonished at how gravely offensive things became trifle to them, which he would never have fathomed that an insult like bastard was something one could take in one stride, as though it were as benign as stupid. Their tendency to break into sudden unchecked fights. He hated the heavy smell of unwashed bodies and body odors that could not be hidden under harsh smelling colognes. The strong smell of urine that hung in the air every morning from the corners of bed-wetting students. He hated the tendency of things to go missing, swiftly and without trace. And he hated, most of all, the ridicule you were bound to get if you complained about any of this, because he had quickly observed the haughty airs the boys put out with new students. He felt grateful for wisdom and deku, their nearly unquestioning loyalty, the closest to kin he had. For there in the vast seminary, he felt cut off from the world, overwhelmed by a pure and intimate sense of his ordinariness. If he screamed with all his might, no one outside the walls would hear him. He thought about a boy often. In his passing daydreams, he saw himself in the kitchen, standing in front of a boy, reaching out to kiss him. But just when he was close enough, a boy's face transformed and gave way to his father's. To those eyes, bedeviled by a heart-stopping deadness, in the brief calls made through Mr. Josiah to his father, messages transmitted back and forth in clipped monosyllables to save cost. He would make out only an obscure picture of the situation at home. Once, he happened to call when his mother was within reach, and she informed him at the end of the call that a boy and Ekene had sent their regards, and as he handed the phone back to Mr. Josiah, made his way out of the room, he was filled with a bubbly warmth in his chest that stayed with him for days. Obifuna was permanently assigned Saturday labor on the school farm. It was a rare stroke of luck. The SS1 boys, regarded as the school's workforce, were usually saddled with the most grueling task: washing the toilets, handling the school waste, leveling the tall grasses around the school when necessary. Farm labor, basically reserved for the SS2 students, felt like a miracle. At the farm, there were too many laborers for the few tasks that needed to be done, and although Obifuna did not mind joining in the harvest, even found it enjoyable, he and the other SS1 boys apportioned farm labor were mostly restricted to weeding with a hoe. The agricultural prefect, Senior Chijioke, was popular for his friendliness to subordinates, blurring the lines between supervisor and supervisee. At the end of each session, he let a junior student climb the orange and guava trees and rain down fruit, letting each laborer have a piece with instruction to eat it right there and not take it back to their dormitories. Obifuna found the weeding soothing. His movements were rhythmic, the plants giving way beneath his hoe, conversations thriving around him. There, as he worked, he noticed a group of seniors sitting on a felled tree, munching on the sugar canes they had cut down earlier. Obifuna could make out snatches of their conversation from where he was. The senior speaking had a force to his tone, as if the conversation were an argument, even though the others simply looked on with an awed expression on their faces as he spoke about a place called Green Gate, where Obifuna gathered. He had gone the previous night. Obifuna knew who he was. Senior Papilo, so named after the Nigerian football star Nwankwo Kanu, whose skill he was said to perfectly embody, was the captain of the school football team. He was equally one of the most feared seniors on campus, notable for his spontaneous temper and his creative punishments. A non-perfect, he inspired greater reverence than even the most senior perfect. His description of Green Gate was lucid, the occasional pauses building anticipation. Obifuna worked on the weeds around the group, unable to stop himself from inching closer, intrigued by the forbidden nature of the information being shared. So utterly absorbed was he in the story and in his imaginings of this place Senior Papilo described that he did not immediately notice the silence that had settled in, the palpable tension that now pervaded the air. He looked up with slow, cautious movements, and to his absolute horror, saw that Senior Papillo was staring directly at him. "Come," he said. Obifuna averted his eyes and pulled at the weeds with extra vigor. "I swear to God, if I repeat myself." Obifuna straightened up from the weeding and touched his chest to confirm that he was the one being asked, hoping the blankness on his face was projecting his feigned innocence. Senior Papillo held his eyes without confirming. Something about the way he tapped on the sugarcane in his hand told Obifuna that the senior would make a lunge for him if he wasted any more time. He approached the group with his head bowed, contrite, cursing his curiosity. "You are going to repeat everything you just heard, word for word," Senior Papillo said. Obifuna looked up at him. "I see you enjoy big boys' gist. Figured we should invite you to formally join us, no?" he asked the other seniors. They responded with brief cackling. The moment was tense. A light breeze from around the trees rustled the cassava leaves and settled in Obifuna's ears. His heart thumped fiercely, as if about to pop out of his chest. He could feel the sweat trickling down his back as all the seniors stared at him. His legs had begun to itch. Finally, one of the seniors, obviously keen on getting back to the conversation that had been interrupted, tapped Senior Papillo and made a pleading gesture with his palms, and Senior Papillo waved Obifuna away. Obifuna went back to uprooting the weeds, making sure to move as far away from them as possible. Jeku laughed when Obifuna told him, "I thought you wanted to listen to gist. Why did you run away?" Obifuna laughed along. He was still unable to shrug off the sense of trepidation he felt. He was unable, too, to blink away the sinister look in Senior Papillo's eyes, which had made him certain for a split second that he would drop dead without being touched. Senior Papillo is like that, Sha," Jeku said. "Very wicked human being." He touched Obifuna's shoulder, leaning close to whisper in his ear, "If you ask me, I'd advise you to avoid him. Don't let him notice you, for good or bad. You will get it either way, trust me." Obifuna had not planned to get himself noticed by Senior Papillo or by anyone else for that matter. So it was terrifying for him when, a few days later, he casually glanced away from the blackboard through the window of the classroom to see Senior Papillo strolling past with some of his friends. Before Obifuna had the chance to look away, Senior Papillo looked to his right and their eyes met. And for the rest of the day, and for days afterwards, Obifuna thought about the look in Senior Papillo's eyes. That slight, suggestive smile that tugged his lips to a corner. It disturbed him somehow. And that is the end of part 2, chapter 4. Let's talk about it. That was quite long. So chapter 4 of part 2 started with us sort of be in this new location, which is Owerri, and we start with Ngozi and Obifuna making their way into this sort of campus. And as we continue to read, we come to realize that this is the new school that, you know, like it's called, it's like a seminary. It's where Obifuna will now be attending, and it's also a boarding school. You know, after the occasion that happened in chapter 3 with, Anazi catching Obifuna and a boy having that little intimate moment, he makes a decision to, send a boy to boarding school. And, he was beaten and got a bunch of marks. His mom was really upset at, him getting beat like that. And she even was screaming and just yelling and stuff when she came back. And all these things is sort of highlighted on in the story. Obifuna was even afraid to express to his mom the actual true reason to why his dad decided that he wants, Obifuna to go to boarding school, despite him being really successful at his current school, before boarding school, and how he did well on the WIAC, and how, the head mistress and just people in the school would tell his parents great things of how he was doing his accomplishments. And so she felt sort of excluded, and deep down she wasn't sure at first, but deep down she knew that something, that there's a greater reason that it was between father and son that she obviously did not know about. And obviously Anazi isn't telling her, and Obifuna, her son, is not expressing the true reason because of his deep fear of what his mom would think about this thing that his father had to catch him and another boy doing. And so, yeah, Obifuna is now in boarding school, which is quite different. He's never been in this type of space. But he meets, his bunkmate, who is wisdom, and they build a relationship. He sort of helps him out and tell him things and gives him advices. And, we also get introduced to Jeku, who is, somebody else that Obifuna also comes to meet. And he also plays a role in helping sort of Obifuna adjust to this new circumstance he's now in, of living in boarding school, and being with a bunch of boys, and having to adjust to different characteristics and different people and different way of life, basically. And these two guys really were kin to his time at boarding school. Oh, and Obifuna completely hates it, by the way, and we read in chapter 4 just all the things he hates about boarding school. To, the horrible circumstances, the way of life, the food, the people, the living circumstances, and just so much things that were described in chapter 4 of the things he hates, which I completely understand, because boarding school in Nigeria is not for the weak. And so all these things are just really sort of difficult. And there was a time he almost got basically whooped by one of the seniors, because that's a common thing. Seniors beat the lower class students, or underclass underclass students, like the juniors and stuff. And he sort of understands why they do that. Like, at some point he sort of thinks about the fact that when they were juniors, they also were beat by seniors, and so now when they become seniors, they do the same to the junior. And so he thinks about it in that way, but he still has so much hate for them and all the things that they do, the evil things that they do to the juniors, and just so much other things that he just hates. And we also, towards the end, have a moment between one of the seniors and Obifuna. It starts with, you know, when Obifuna, or not when, but Obifuna is basically like has this new sort of task, which is that he is a laborer at the school's farm, and so he helps out with wheat, plowing, um, and and stuff like that, and removing weed from the ground and stuff like that. And so, we have a moment in which he hears a gist, and I guess the senior caught him, and then, he sort of confronts him, and at some point lets Obifuna go. But then Obifuna sees him another day, which he's been trying to avoid because Jeku, sort of advised him not to make eye contact with that guy because he's just this sort of evil slash wicked senior. He's like popular and stuff, and he doesn't really want any issues with him. But they start to lock eye, and this is something that Obi-Wan thinks about for a few days, and it sort of disturbed him. But I think it's gonna lead to something greater that I'm curious to read about in chapter 5. I don't know if it's gonna be like a new relationship that's gonna be formed. I want to just sort of see how the author's gonna explore the relationship between the senior Papilo and Obifuna in chapter 5 later on. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this quite long video, and thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed, please kindly like, subscribe, and comment, and I hope to see you in the next chapter video, and I really, really appreciate your support. Thank you.